Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all. I would like to know who you are. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to see your responses, but I would like to know what role you serve. I'm assuming most of you are educators, but maybe your parents. Are you a special ed teacher? Are you a reading interventionist? Are you gen ed teacher? And when you tell me the role you serve, also, are you elementary? Are you middle school, high school? Adult ed. So I would be grateful if you take a moment to tell me, answer those questions. So I know my audience because it's always important to know your audience. And while you're putting that information in, and I see I've got a coach, I've got some reading interventionists, I've got support staff. Wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. This is very helpful. So this really can be and hopefully will be relevant for teachers, whether you're gen ed teachers, you're special ed, you are a reading interventionist, you're a coach. I hope this is applicable to all of you. In terms of grade level, you're going to see a video with kindergarten children, but we have been working with teachers all the way up through high school because syntax we want to get started early, right in kindergarten, and we can go right up through high school teaching our students about sentences. All right, thank you very much for letting me know what you are doing here, what your job is. So the Syntax Attuned Educator, we're going to specifically focus on comprehension today, but I will say, if I had more time, I would incorporate writing into this. But just know that sentences we are going to make sure our kids can understand sentences comprehension-wise, but also we want them to be able to write really good sentences. And because comprehension and writing are reciprocal skills, we're going to really talk about writing as well, or at least I want you to be thinking about writing. I'm going to do a very brief introduction of me. My roots are in special education. I started my career exactly 50 years ago, and I was very, very blessed to be in a master's program at the University of Connecticut, studying with a researcher from Haskins Laboratories, which some of you may know was a research hub in Connecticut for many years, starting in 1947, I believe. Been around for a long time, now affiliated with Yale Child Studies Center and the University of Connecticut. And I just learned right away in my early career days that the research should be driving our work with students. And because I studied with a researcher, it's always been a passion of mine. But I'm really in the business of supporting teachers' ability to apply that research. So as much as I'd like to expect and hope teachers would read research studies, I know you're busy. I know you've got lots of things that are on your plate, the most important of which is getting your students to become more proficient at reading and writing. So the work that I and my team at Literacy How do is translating the research for our teachers and making it very practical and applicable. And we're really agnostic when it comes to reading programs. We really do believe that the teacher is the key variable when it comes to teaching students to read and write. So we empower them with knowledge. We also believe that literacy is the language of opportunity. It is a civil right. And it's always been my mission-driven work to make sure that every child has the opportunity to reach their full potential, and that will only happen if they develop proficiency in reading and writing. And we have good data to show that at least 95% of our children can get to a basic reading level. And yet we have 33% of our students in the United States reading on grade level. So it's not okay what we're doing as far as making sure kids have these opportunities. We have to do better, and knowing more is going to enable us to do better. Today, I have 3 objectives. The first is that I do want to share a little bit of research on the role that syntactic knowledge plays in reading comprehension and why it's important that you, the teacher, build your own syntactic knowledge. Secondly, I'm going to spend a lot of time sharing instructional activities and routines that you can use throughout the day, whatever you teach, to support your students' ability to comprehend sentences. And the third is to really emphasize the importance of integrating literacy through content area instruction. So if you're a middle school teacher, particularly, or a high school teacher, where you're focused specifically on content, sentences are in your content, and you're going to find that there are students that are learning about science or learning about social studies or whatever the content is, or math, but their struggle is with comprehending those sentences. And I'm going to give you some tips for how you can help the students who have those difficulties. This is a little QR code that will take you to our website, literacyhow.org, which is a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2009. When we started our work, the National Reading Panel had just released its findings. So in 2000, when I was at Haskins Laboratories, before I founded Literacy How, what we were hired to do, I and a team of other reading specialists were hired to translate the research. And at the time, we had those 5 pillars, right? We had phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. I made an executive decision as the director of the Haskins Literacy Initiative to take those 5 core ideas, those 5 pillars, and put them around a wheel. But at the center of that wheel was language, because we really believe, and we drive this point home all the time, that language is at the core. The teachers need to understand that literacy is built on, as Britton said, James Britton years ago, on a sea of talk. We really want to be sure our students are proficient with oral language, with speaking and listening, because if they are, and when they are, they're going to leverage those strengths to be able to read and write proficiently. You'll notice that fluency is one of the pillars back in 2000 with the National Reading Panel. And we acknowledge the fact that children have to be skilled. To be skilled reading, a skilled reader, you have to read fluently, right? But when we first started our work, we noticed that teachers were really focused on words correct per minute, because you can measure that easily. 1 minute, you know how accurate and how automatic a student is with word reading. And it's a very important indicator of comprehension. But unfortunately, what we saw happening in classrooms was a focus on speed and not necessarily on making meaning. So again, I made an executive decision in 2009 to replace fluency with syntax. And so today you're going to hear me talk about reading fluency and the importance of that. So by no means don't interpret me taking fluency out of our wheel by saying it's not important. It's extremely important, but it's really thinking about reading fluency and how we can talk and teach syntax explicitly while building our students' reading fluency skills. You'll also notice we added morphology. I'm not going to talk about that today, but that's important. We put spelling here. And then, in both wheels, we have text comprehension and written expression in the same section of the wheel. And again, I want to specifically call out to all of you today that what we're talking about for syntax instruction is really important for getting kids to write proficiently. And Joan Sedita's work and the writing rope is so great, and all the things that go into having students be able to write proficiently. If they can't write sentences, they absolutely are going to need more explicit instruction in syntax. So sort of kicking off our, our content for today and thinking about syntax as a bridge between word recognition and word reading fluency, which I just spoke about, and the ability to comprehend, to construct meaning, right? Syntax for me is a great bridge to do that. And I hope you'll be able to see why. And I'm going to specifically talk for a few minutes about, not for a few minutes, I'm going to talk about it actually on and off throughout this presentation, the importance of phrasing and prosody. But as I mentioned, my first objective is to just bring a little bit of the research into this conversation, because as I said, I love the research. I read it all the time, and I want to share some, I think, really important findings with you all. First of all, the role of syntax in reading. This is something that we learned from Joe Torgeson a number of years ago, and Kanan Oakhill, other researchers in the field, talked about the fact that proficient comprehension of text is influenced by having adequate syntactic knowledge. So those kids who are good at comprehending actually understand how sentences work. And that's important. However, this doesn't happen a lot in classrooms. Again, from my experience, this explicit teaching of the higher level components of literacy, including syntax and semantics, text composition, they may receive little attention. And Louise Spear-Swirling, some of you may know that name, has written some briefs for the International Dyslexia Association on structured literacy. And that is a finding that she called out, and something that we have really seen in our work with teachers. And by the way, I didn't mention this, but I have a team of 10, we call ourselves mentors, who go into classrooms throughout the state of Connecticut and beyond. And we work with teachers in their classrooms, providing job embedded or embedded professional development in their classrooms with their students. And this is something we've also noticed as well in our travels over the last 15 years at Literacy How. Some of you may have seen this infographic, but if you haven't, I want to share it with you today. There's a lot going on here, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this infographic other than to just highlight this infographic produced by the International Dyslexia Association. If you notice at the bottom here, we talk about the why. What is the science of reading? And why is that, like, has to be front and center when we do our work? There is a body of research that should be driving what we do as teachers. And if we think about that science of reading, we talk about structured literacy. That's the brand name that we use. It could be Wilson, it could be Spire, it could be any number of programs, but structured literacy is an approach, right? It's not, it's sort of agnostic in terms of the program, the publisher, or what have you. And the structured literacy can be divided into the what, which are what I used to call the elements of structured literacy, right? The content that integrates these domains of language, and the how. And the how is, how do we teach that content? The pedagogical principles that are absolutely fundamental to teaching anything, whether it's reading, math, doesn't matter, right? These are good principles of instruction, pedagogy. And then at the top, we see the who. Who is structured literacy designed for? It's actually designed for everyone. It's designed for all students, whether they're in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, or special education. All students need more or less intensity and individualization of that structured literacy content. But I do, because today is really focused on syntax, I do just want to pull out part of the infographic, which has to do with the what, the instructional content. And if you know Hollis Scarborough's rope, which you'll see in a minute, because no presentation would be complete without it, you'll understand sort of how this infographic came to be, because we all acknowledge that we have these two domains, right, that contribute to reading comprehension, the product of word recognition and comprehension. And so all of these things are underneath these sections, and you see sentence structure and grammar is underneath the language comprehension side of this infographic. But you'll notice that we also added, and I say we because I worked on the team that helped develop this infographic and really try to get into the weeds on what it included. We also included handwriting and spelling on this side, right? And we included composition on this side. And I like the fact that we have got writing here too. Hollis Scarborough's rope doesn't talk about writing, but we all acknowledge that it's an important component of literacy. And then at the bottom, we have this idea of integration across those two different components. And this is an old infographic that IDA did and showing the elements of structured literacy. And here's syntax. And these are the other elements. Again, I'm only going to talk about the one today, syntax. Actually, I'm going to talk about two, and I'll explain that in a moment. I promised to show you Hollis Scarborough's rope because, again, we have to. It's so good. But we know the simple view here is depicted by this rope, even though Hollis didn't design or develop this graphic organizer to do that, but it does a nice job of showing the strands related to decoding or word recognition and those strands that are devoted to language comprehension. And you'll see here is where we are going to talk about language structures. And I am going to talk about syntax and semantics because you can't pull them apart. They're inextricably linked. Having said that, I'm going to focus primarily on the sentence structures, and I'll explain more about that in the next slide. Because if you think about syntax, you can't really teach syntax without acknowledging semantics, right? And semantics is one of the principles, one of the elements of structured literacy. If we go back to looking at this slide, semantics is down here, the relationships among words. So coming back here, we're going to talk about sentence structure, and sentences are comprised of words, and words have meaning only in a context, right? So we're going to talk about sentence structures, the sentences, the types of sentences, punctuation. We're going to talk about how words, phrases, and clauses work together, how those relationships are understood in terms of meaning through the use of these phrases and clauses. We're going to talk a little bit about coherence, because the whole idea of comprehending text is that, oh, this is making sense. It's coherent. And we can't just read one sentence at a time. We have to link one sentence to the next, to the next. And we talk about sentence structures helping with that. And then another aspect of language structures is the way words refer to objects and concepts, and the way words and their reference can be understood in context. Nancy Hennessy, who's another one of my gurus. I've learned so much from Nancy about comprehension and more, syntax as well. I love this quote that as a reader, we have to figure out these relationships between words in order to construct meaning, and those relationships are conveyed through different types of sentences. And the thing is, some of these sentences can be tricky, right? So just take a second and see if you can find in the first sentence the subject and the predicate. Find the subject and the predicate. Anybody want to put the subject and the predicate in the chat? No takers?
Okay. Young is the subject.
Yep. Yay. Wonderful. Yay. So good for you, Beth. You found the subject is young and the predicate is man. Excellent. That tricks people sometimes because they look at that and they think, oh, it must be man, right? Is the subject. And nope, it doesn't have a predicate, but in fact it does. And here, whoops. Sometimes I can advance and sometimes not. Here's another tricky sentence. Find the subject and the predicate. Somebody put it in the chat for me. Oops, sorry. Trying to find that chat at the top. Oh, never mind. Sometimes, oh, there it is. Good. Cotton is the subject, and what is the predicate, Nicole? What does the cotton do? It grows, Melissa. Thank you. Excellent. So these are not sentences for kids. These are sentences for us as adults to think about sentences being challenging, being tricky for a variety of reasons, which I'm going to share more about. So again, thinking about our own syntactic knowledge and just defining what we mean by syntactic knowledge is the ability to understand and then be able to create orally and in writing a variety of grammatical structures, right? Sentences within the context of a sentence, or grammatical structures, whether they're adverbial phrases, noun phrases, verb phrases. I'm going to explain more about that. And this syntactic knowledge, as we said, supports students' comprehension of text. And this quote by Marianne Wolf and Stephanie Gottwald in a wonderful paper that they wrote together called Serious Wordplay, which is in your bibliography at the end. I highly recommend the article. It's an easy read, and it really does, I think, do a nice job of explaining how this syntactic knowledge matters and what to do about it. And it talks about the fact that children's exposure to read alouds, to rich read alouds with varied sentence structure and challenging text are going to develop this syntactic knowledge. And as they develop it, it's going to support their ability to comprehend more complex text. That's it for research. I told you it would be short, but again, just to make sure that you feel comfortable with some of that terminology. Now, let's get down to the meat of the matter, which is how do you teach syntax for reading comprehension? And you saw this picture a little while ago. I want to talk about clarifying ambiguity. So that's part of syntax. And I'll show you an example of what I mean by that in just a second. But before I do, this is a quote from a book that Nancy Eberhardt and I wrote in our Structured Literacy Professional Development series on syntax. And we equate syntactic awareness with phonemic awareness. Everybody knows about phonemic awareness. We've talked about it all the time, right? And what is it? We're teaching kids to manipulate the sounds in words. It could be segmenting, blending, deleting, substituting, but that ability to consciously manipulate sounds is a metalinguistic skill. Similarly, syntactic awareness is a metalinguistic skill, but instead of manipulating those sounds, we're manipulating the words. We're moving the words around. We're rearranging the words because that is going to impact the word, right? The sentence rather, where it is in the sentence, just like the phonemes moving around in a word are going to impact what word we're asking the student to learn and read. So in this case, this idea that order matters, and Steven Pinker, who's a renowned linguist, who studied with Chomsky, talked about the fact that beyond understanding the meaning of the individual words, it's actually their order that is most important in terms of conveying thought. So if you look at these two sentences, we have the same 6 words in each sentence. They're just arranged differently. Do they mean the same thing? What do you think? Yes or no? No, right? In the first example, what color is the house? Right? We know it's red. In the second example, do we know what color the house was before they painted it? We don't. We moved that red after the word house in the second sentence, and it changed the meaning. Similarly, we have these two words, blue and sky. If we put blue before sky, right, versus blue after sky, we have the function of the word sky changing, right? It's a noun in this case with an adjective describing it. In this case, sky is the adjective. It tells us what kind of blue it is. So just that little change is going to impact meaning. I probably didn't say this at the beginning, so I should say it loud and clear now. And that is that we're not teaching syntax the old-fashioned way. And by the old-fashioned way, I'm going to date myself because I learned syntax a long time ago when I was in grade school, in a Catholic grade school. And the nuns did teach us syntax. They for sure taught us, and we spent a lot of time looking for nouns and verbs, and we diagram sentences and so forth. So I feel like I learned some syntax along the way, but I didn't learn it as a function or in a function-based way. And by that I mean, it didn't teach me explicitly about the role that words play in sentences. And that's what we want our kids to understand. What role does the noun play? What role does the verb play? What role do these phrases play in terms of building relationships and modifying and describing the words in the sentences? So the first thing we have to have our students understand is that these sentences are comprised of words, phrases, and clauses. So in the first example, we have birds fly. We have just two words, right? And we have an independent clause because all we need for that is a subject and a predicate. Now, it's a boring sentence unless we elaborate it. So we're going to talk about what kinds of birds are flying, right? Oh, they're nocturnal birds. Which nocturnal birds are flying? Oh, they're the birds of all types. And when do they fly? Like, we need to know, right? A little bit more description, a little more information about those birds, not those flies, those birds. And when are they flying? Throughout the night. So we're going to just keep going back to this idea of, of building sentences through acknowledging the role that they play and then asking some important questions so we make sure we know if kids are understanding them. The other thing we explicitly have to teach them is the 8 building blocks. So we don't call them parts of speech, we call them building blocks, because what do? They build sentences for us, and that each block serves an important meaning based function. And together we can create an unlimited number and variety of sentences. So here are our 8 building blocks. We have nouns, adjectives, and pronouns that are pink because they kind of go together. We have verbs and adverbs that are blue. They go together. We have prepositions, conjunctions, and actually pronouns could be green here too. And I'll explain why. These 3 building blocks serve a particular function, which I'll tell more about. And then we have these little old interjections over here that we don't talk as much about, but they certainly have a role to play in sentences too. They're just not as frequently used. So again, when we're thinking about where do we begin, whether we're talking ideally about a kindergarten child who is just starting to learn about all sorts of things when it comes to literacy, we really want to make sure they understand the concept of a sentence. So what is a sentence? Most of the time, kids will tell you a sentence begins with a capital letter and ends with a period. Does that tell us its function? They might tell us it makes sense. That's pretty vague, especially for a 5-year-old. they might say, oh, it's a complete thought. That's also pretty abstract. So we really want them to understand what is a sentence. It's a who and a do, right? Who or what is doing something. We then get into the who is a namer, right? Who or what is doing the action. It's naming something, and the action, right, is here. And we can further describe the noun. We could say the namer is a noun and the verb is the action word. And then later on, when we get more sophisticated and we want kids to use the different terminology or the labels, we can call them the subject and the predicate. And we have simple subject, compound subject, complete subject, and we have simple predicate. This should say predicate. Sorry about that. I needed to change this slide and I forgot to do that. Compound predicate and complete predicate, where in this case we have the verb, right? It's a compound verb, ran and played, where in the yard. That's considered the complete predicate. So usually we start with the verb because it's an action word and we want kids to, they know right away, they get action. And so most verbs tell what the nouns do. They tell the function of a verb. I mean, the function of this verb is to tell action. What did it do? It gives us that, that action, as I said. So what did city dog do? He jumped. Now, verbs can be tricky because there are a lot of verbs that are not action verbs. So children have to right away understand that verbs can also link. And here you have an example of a linking verb, right? Linking city dog with the frog's new friend. And lots of examples of that. Now I'm looking at my handouts and I feel like I missed something. So what I missed, but I'm going to tell you right now, is we talk about namers and actions. And like I said, if we go back up here, sorry for that, this who or namer is the noun in the sentence. And we tell kindergarten children it's a namer. Why? Because they might be able to tell you a noun is a person, place, or thing. But what are they missing? They're missing telling you what the function it is. You can say, you're right, a noun is a person, place, or thing. But what does the noun do? So we want them to say a noun names. It names a person, place, thing, or idea. So that's its function. And that's why, I want to make sure kids understand that. So for young students, we might have them do what we call a word function sort, where they're going to sort pictures into one of two columns, right? We have namers here. We have person, place, or thing. So a bell would go here. A doctor would go here. A duck would go here, or goose. It's a duck, right? Or we have our action words. We have, and these are harder to find, jumping and panting and, ringing. So what we want to do in this activity with young students is no words involved. We just want them to conceptually be able to sort the words into one of two columns, because every sentence has to have a who and a do, a noun and a verb. And then when they can actually sort words, we can have them actually do the sorting with the actual words. Now, I want to talk about a next aspect of syntax, and we're going to come back to other parts of speech in a moment, but I want to talk about this aspect of syntax that we talk about frequently with our students, and that is the importance of interpreting word meaning. And when we think about word meaning, we think about semantics. And as I mentioned before, semantics and syntax go together, right? Because I can tell you the word season, and you wouldn't know if I'm talking about the period of the year, which is a noun or a namer, or to add flavor to food, right? Unless I give you a sentence with that word in it. So the reason we spend a lot of time talking about word meaning when we teach about syntax is because we have so many words in English that are multiple meaning words. So again, I feel like this is another part of teaching about sentences that is really important. Now, we've talked about the namer and the action. So when we want students to go beyond that kernel sentence, right, with a subject and a predicate, a namer and a verb, we're going to say to them, tell me more about the action. Tell me more about the verb. And we're going to teach our students that you can expand or tell more about an action using a single word, using a phrase, or using a clause. Okay, so here we have the 3 adverbial questions we're going to ask our students to get them to tell us more. We're going to ask them when, we're going to ask them where, and we're going to ask them how. So if we ask them a when question, we can come up with single words. And notice here that not all adverbs end in ly. A lot of times we teach kids that, but if you look at this list here, there are lots of single words that act as adverbs describing the verb, and they're not ly words. I also want you to notice how frequently our questions are going to yield a phrase. So if I ask you to tell me when you're going to go to the beach, and you tell me on Tuesday, that doesn't feel like it's an adverb, but it's actually an adverbial phrase. It's 2 words acting as an adverb to tell more about and asking that one question. And then not only that, but we can answer questions with a complete clause. Okay, so this is a little more complicated, but for you middle school teachers, I want you to think about this too, that we're going to ask these questions and we're going to elicit and we're going to extract sentences from our students' passages that they're reading, our students' text, and we're going to want them to know that it can be after the storm ended, even though it looks like it's more than an adverb. It's an adverbial clause. So this is an adverb, this is an adverbial, these are adverbial phrases, and these are adverbial clauses. So what does this look like? Again, just to give you an idea, because a lot of what we're doing is, or we're going to do oral language development. So before we do anything, with writing, before we get into complex sentences, we want to make sure kids can do this with picture prompts. So we might say, here's the kernel sentence, who, so we have a picture of a little boy on the ground. Who's the who in this? And the child might say, the boy. What happened? What did he do? Oh, he fell. Okay. Where did he fall? Right? So we might say on the ground, or we might elaborate more than that. And then we're going to ask another action, tell me more phrase, question. When did he fall? He fell while riding his bicycle. And notice I'm going to just put out stickies here. And you're going to see an example of this when I show you a video in a moment, right? We're really eliciting oral language here. We're not concerned about the actual words that they're saying. We want them to get the idea of producing sentences orally first. And we can do this with a variety of passages. And this one is about hurricanes, same idea. The who or what is the hurricane? What did it do? It formed where? Over the Gulf of Mexico. When? In early September. So this is just an idea of the kinds of questions that you can elicit, or you can ask to elicit sentence variety. Notice too, in this case, we can switch where the how goes, right? Instead of rapidly here, we can start the sentence with rapidly. How did the hurricane form, right? And where and when. So does it change the meaning or not? Notice that we're moving things around. We've got index cards, we've got stickies, we've got, manipulatives for the kids to do this so that it's not so didactic and dry and boring for them. Now, after we do work expanding the action, we're going to expand the namer. And it's the same idea where we have 3 questions: how many, what kind, which one? And again, we're going to elicit single words, and this is more prevalent when we think about adjectives, phrases, and clauses, less prevalent. So again, we could start with a picture prompt. We see these butterflies. What are they doing? And we're just going to expand from butterflies flutter to how many butterflies flutter to what kind of butterflies flutter and which butterfly flutters. And you can see, again, we're going to go from pictures to sentences, and we're going to take these sentences right out of the passages that are they're reading in their classrooms. We're not, just taking random text. We're taking the text that we're going to ask them to read and comprehend, and we're just really breaking it down for them, again, through these questioning strategies and elaborating, in this case, the nouns. Or the namers. And showing the relationship, because, we have the eggs, the eggs that are on the leaf. This is a prepositional phrase that is modifying or describing the noun in this case. So again, just moving right along, because I'm looking at my time and I know I'm going to try to end up around 1:15, 1:20, so I have time for questions. So I'm just pacing myself here. Let's talk about building sentences. So there's two basic sentence constructions: a simple sentence, just a subject and a predicate, and then a simple subject that also includes an object. So we call that an SPO, subject, predicate, object. And these are examples from a ReadWorks text. Again, I'm not just making sentences and pulling random sentences. I'm always going to take sentences from the student's text to demonstrate and explicitly teach a concept like this. Also, just very quickly pointing out, because there's so much to share with you today and I can't share everything, but we talk about subject, predicate, object, or subject, verb, object, SVO, which is canonical order, or non-canonical order, where I put the object first. So if you look at this bottom, I could say 2 icebergs were explored by researchers, right? And now I've got the object first. Those are harder sentences for students to comprehend. So just something for you all to think about. This is where you can move the words around, and you notice I had to say were explored, so I changed the text, but the meaning was the same. Now, I want to show you this video of one of our mentors, Elke Blanchard, who is working with a group of kindergarten students. And you'll notice how she starts you'll see at the video, she's going to start them by having them sort. Because I asked, I was sharing, we're going to sort words into the who and the do, so they understand the function of the namers versus the verbs, the action words, and then how she's going to get them to expand and tell more about those words. So take it away, Elke, and hopefully this plays as we practiced during our practice session. Can you see that?
You know the gesture, Kate. This one? Do everybody make this gesture?
Can you hear it?
Look, they're all right here too, with the letters that it goes with. So today, now that you're warmed up, you know what our vowels say, right? You're not going to have a difficult time reading these words. So I'm going to have you read some words. You have to decide if the word that you're reading tells me who, so that means it could be a person, a place, or a thing, or an animal, or does it tell me an action? Is my word an action word that I'm reading? All right, so let's read this first word together. Oh, let's find, I see that was fast. Is run, is that a who, or is that something we do? It's something we do. Can you put it under the do column, please? Okay, is it a who or is it something we do? you make your fingers hop. If you can make it happen, it's something that you do. There. All right, so now we have who's and we have do's. And in order to make a sentence, you have to have a who and a do. You get to choose who you want to talk about and what they're going to do. And we're going to start off our sentence where we're going to say with a capital letter. So now say this. The
frog swims.
Good. You want to use it? Pull that over. All right. And look what you said, swims, and that's so great. Guess what I have? I have your S there because we don't say the frog swim. We say the frog
Swims.
And then what do I have to, what do you think is on my last card?
Period.
All right. Can you say your sentence now? Go ahead and say it.
The frog swims.
Have your students say it. You're the teacher. Say, okay, everybody say the sentence.
Okay, everybody sing the sentence. The frog swims.
Now, can you add to it for me? Can you tell me where he swims? Who could tell me where he swims?
In the pond.
In the pond?
Yeah.
Okay, let me put these out. In the pond. Good. Let's read that sentence now. Ready to go.
The frog swims in the pond.
I'm going to change it to this. Now what does the sentence say?
Frog.
Read the sentence to me.
The frog swims.
And let's go back to in the pond. Let's change it to not just in the pond. Let's change it to in the big. Do you want it to be big or little? Big. The big pond. Okay. Ready? Go ahead.
The frog swims in the big pond.
Now, let's say this together. The frogs. And then let's say this. Swim. And then let's say all of this together in the big pond. So say that as a chunk. Ready? We're going to do it this way. The frogs. And instead of saying the frogs, say the frogs swim in the big pond. Say it this way. In the big pond.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. I've got a couple minutes left. By all means, go to our YouTube channel and look at the end of this. It's fairly, consistent with what she's doing, but I want to make sure I get to all my slides. There's also playlists for every section of the reading wheel on our YouTube channel, so you can see a lot of other great videos of what things look like in the classroom. All right, I want to talk about meaning links. And I mentioned that there were those three grammatical building blocks that go together: prepositions, pronouns, and conjunctions. Why? Because they connect the words, the phrases, and the clauses in sentences to make meaning. Dutro and Moran wrote a great article years ago talking about these as mortar words, because they said that they were like lexical glue that connects the ideas, shows relationships, and make references. These are especially important. This particular article, Rethinking Reading Comprehension, specifically talked about these words as being challenging for our multilingual learners. So it's an excellent book or article that talks about that. So they create these cohesive ties. We also call them cohesive ties. Some people call them signal words. We have different terms for them, but you get the idea. They link ideas and show relationships. So prepositions are one of those. Most express a relationship in space or position. Some a relationship in time. Prepositions can be challenging, right? Because they're pretty abstract. So we want to make sure that we teach the function, right? Signaling this relationship we just talked about, and then provide lots of examples for students and have them show, with an arrow or some way to demonstrate the connection between those words. And find them in your passages, find them in your in the books that you're reading with your students, because they're everywhere. And notice that prepositions are always part of a phrase. So we're going to think about what questions do they answer? Are they adjectival questions or are they adverbial questions, right? So this is an adverbial phrase. Where did the dog run? And this is an adjectival prepositional phrase. Which dog was wagging its tail? So again, the function that these prepositional phrases play in sentences are very important. And for, young students or multilingual learners who need more explicit instruction, we can make use of real concrete objects that can be manipulated, right? To have them practice orally. A lot of our students need oral rehearsal before we can expect them to actually comprehend and write these sentences, and then bring it into their writing, as it says in the next step. So this is just an example of what it might look like to have an object, and putting a cat inside the box, behind, beside, on, over, in. And then using sentences, actually, again, from their text. So where is the chrysalis? Where is the caterpillar? Where is the butterfly? And the students have to answer the question, where does the chrysalis hang? Where does the caterpillar crawl? Where does the butterfly hover? Using these prepositions. And you notice that in each case, I asked adverbial questions. Now, I did mention punctuation is important. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but I think you'll all agree that our students who struggle with reading fluency often read right through the punctuation marks. It's like they don't even exist. So we really have to focus on the role that punctuation plays and practice with the different punctuation marks. We also want to point out to our students these punctuation marks matter. Like the apostrophe here shows possession. It's the same 5 letters with an apostrophe. It means something very different than those 5 letters without the apostrophe. So the inflectional endings are also tricky, especially for our multilingual learners. So coming back to where we started when we talk about phrasing and prosody, I want to spend the next 5 minutes or so as we wrap up, really thinking about where does phrasing come in to play when we're thinking about syntax and the relationship to reading fluency. And this quote by a researcher, I'm not sure how to pronounce that person's name, so I'm not even going to try, but I am going to read the quote. When a child starts to use text reading prosody by using correct word boundaries, right? The use of pauses, the intonation patterns. This actually is a clue to us, the teacher who's listening to them read, that they're actually making meaning, which clearly is important for us to know, and that they're understanding the semantic structure of the text. And once it becomes more advanced, it actually does start to facilitate reading comprehension. Because I've looked high and low for research studies to point to the role that prosody and phrasing play in not only reading fluency, but in comprehension. So this idea that reading fluency is characterized first by accuracy, then automaticity, and last but not least by prosody. And that is reading those sentences and words in grammatical entities. And if you think about listening to a student read text out loud, which we always want to do, again, not just to see if they're reading accurately and automatically, but are they scooping? Are they phrasing? And this is the NAEP fluency scale. So I'm going to suggest teachers that you listen to your students' prosody and rate them in terms of their prosody expression. And you can find that scale online. And this is just, acknowledging the importance of semantic and syntactic knowledge as they are developing their reading fluency, and how we can explicitly teach this phrasing by having them scoop the subject, the predicate, the prepositional phrases, and then the clauses that I haven't talked at length about, but explicitly teaching those clauses and the difference between an independent and dependent clause is also very important. And then looking at, again, scooping these or having your students scoop these phrases and these clauses, and then having them read them in those grammatical entities and asking the questions. In the first case, I might say, who's the sentence about? And they'd say, researchers. What are they doing? They discovered. When did they discover? Recently. Let's put it all together. Recent researchers recently discovered. And what did they discover? And then you see that you can actually build their scooping, their parsing. You can have them scoop as you ask those questions to sort of model what they should be doing in their heads, right, as they read. The last thing I want to talk about is this idea of integrating explicit syntax and sentence instruction into all content areas. And I've shown you this reading wheel today and all these areas of comprehensive literacy instruction that include all these domains. And I've just taken one of those domains today, but we have to think about in our instruction, in our classrooms, we're not teaching these things in isolation, right? They're all interconnected. One of the big debates that's going on right now is phonemic awareness and phonics. Do we teach phonemic awareness in the dark, as they say, or should it always be coupled with phonics instruction? And, you know, we can have these conversations are really important that we have them as professionals. But I think what teachers want is direction. They want to know how best to do this work. And I think the integration piece is extremely important when we think about this. So just a last couple of words about, you know, integration. One of the things that we want to think about is this idea of cohesion. So where grammar and comprehension meet, and this whole idea again of bringing in our different parts of speech or grammatical building blocks. We talked a little bit about prepositions. We have pronouns too as another building block for cohesion. Pronouns are difficult for our multilingual learners, as we know, so we have to explicitly teach how they and feathers are referring to the same information, because cohesion does rely on these cohesive ties. We have synonym substitution, so it's not just the pronouns that build cohesion, it's the substitutions that we use when we use a synonym. For example, a great sense of relief is a comfort is a synonym for that phrase, a great sense of relief. And there's another example below. And just thinking about what you can do as teachers. Okay, so you've got this piece of text from Hatchet, Gary Paulson's novel that's very popular and has been for many years. And this is just one sentence. So I would pull this sentence out of the text as an example and ask the student to first find the predicate. So what's the predicate in that example? In that sentence, what's the predicate? You have to read a bunch of words before you get to it, right? Anybody want to type in the chat what the predicate is? All right, I'll tell you in the interest of time. Up, I got it. Had dropped. Thank you, Leanne. Good. And what's the subject? So we usually have students find the predicate or the verb first because it's the action of the sentence. And then once they find that, we say, who or what dropped? Good, Carol. It's the windstorm that dropped. And then from there, we have to, again, deconstruct the sentence. What did it drop? Because we have a subject, predicate, and object. It dropped pines. Where did it drop the pines? Across each other, right? And so little by little, phrase by phrase, you're going to help deconstruct the sentence. And you might, by asking these questions, and then you might do a color coding of the phrases and how they relate to one another. You can move parts of the sentence again around and see how it changes meaning. So a couple more quick ideas. Tim Shanahan wrote a blog not too long ago. Again, I've been in search of lots of research showing and supporting why we have to teach syntax explicitly, not to all students, but to many. And his quote that really resonated with me is that research studies do suggest that teaching students how to read these sentences out loud. Even your middle school students could be reading these sentences out loud with proper prosody, and that this is going to be helpful in getting them to comprehend these sentences. Because asking questions at the end isn't enough. You want to have this conversation happening while you're reading a text to your students or with your students. Here's an example of a sentence. And what did the teacher ask the students after they read that one sentence? What do you know about Rachel Carson? And one student said, oh, they grew up together. Okay, so they obviously missed that having the relative clause that Carson was a scientist, writer, and ecologist threw the student off and thought they were talking about different people. So our adolescent struggling readers really need this. We need to teach the foundational grammar, the functional grammar in the early grades. But if they haven't received that instruction, we're going to need to support them in the understanding of how sentences work. Because as the text, as it says here, students get older and they're reading more complex text, their ability is even more, it's more important that they understand how to comprehend these sentences. And doing this, some of the instruction I talked about today will support them as they integrate literacy, and we, the teacher, integrate our literacy across content subjects and domain, as this graphic shows. So ELA, social studies, math, science, it fits in everywhere. We have a strand here devoted to syntax, just as we do for vocab and PA and phonics, and comprehension and written expression cuts across all those domains. So in summary, we know syntactic awareness is important. We know explicitly teaching it to many students has a payoff. We teach them function first, right? Labeling, all that other stuff is not as impactful. And then we want them to write these sentences as well. Last thing I'll say is, teachers, you have to take the time to analyze your text. So find those sentences, find the sentences that are going to trip your students up, and give them an opportunity to do the work with sentences that you extract from the passages that you know are going to be challenging for them. And then when you put them, you ask them to read those texts, they're going to be more successful and better able to do so. Here are some of the references that I mentioned in my talk, some resources to learn more about syntax. And I thank you very much for your time.